yoga anatomy course is very popular. What do you think students enjoy most about learning yoga anatomy?
Hmm. Well, thank you for acknowledging the popularity of my courses. Because when you say courses, I think you're thinking of the online ones. But the important thing to remember is that those online courses are recorded versions of live courses that I had been teaching for many years before we put cameras in the room.
Right.
And that's the whole reason, really, why the book Yoga Anatomy came about, because the publishers did a web search for people that were teaching yoga anatomy when they were looking for someone to write this book, which was their idea, not mine.
Okay.
So much of what I'm doing now does revolve around the fact that at a certain point back in 1995, I decided to teach pretty much a year long, or an academic year long course in yoga anatomy. Um, and I think what draws people into a course about yoga anatomy is not necessarily the same thing that makes them enjoy taking a course in yoga anatomy.
Okay.
Um, because I think what draws people in is this idea, which I still have too, and anyone who studies anything about the body has, if they're honest with themselves, is that you can never know enough of it. It's an endless field that's
Right.
comprised of potentially infinite um, complexity and details. And the feeling that if you're going to be teaching a room full of people to move and breathe and do something like yoga, that knowing more anatomy would help you do that more effectively or more safely. I think that's what draws people in. But what I hope lets them enjoy the study is the fact that rather than just memorizing a whole bunch of terms like insertions and actions and origin and things like that, it's really seeing how yoga as a practice can be a lens through which we can view a topic like anatomy to see what's most important and what's most relevant and most useful, and to see how the deepest principles of yoga actually can be derived from looking at how life works.
Okay.
And that's really sort of one of the core ideas behind how I teach.
And that's how it helps them deepen their own practice too.
Well, absolutely, because rather than thinking you have to master not just anatomy, but a whole bunch of ancient texts to really understand what we're doing in an authentic way, when we start to see that this is the first text
Hmm.
and the closest one and in many ways the truest one, um, then it simplifies things and it embodies pretty much every aspect of what we're doing in a way that we can be in touch with very directly through the way we breathe, through the way we move, through the way we live.
Right. Well, speaking of the way we breathe, you placed a really big emphasis on breath work throughout all your practices, really all your teachings. Can you explain why breathing is so important to yoga or
Well, it's so important to life, obviously, and it's, well, to quote my teacher, Jessica Char, because he would say things like, um, if what you're doing in your practice is so intense that it makes you lose focus on your breathing, you're not actually doing yoga anymore.
okay.
You could be doing something perfectly useful, like working out or calisthenics or, um, any kind of physical activity. They can all be beneficial, but for it to be yoga, there's this very sort of specific way in which we use the breath as the connecting force between the mind and the body. Um, and so bringing the mind and the body together through the breath would be a simple way of describing what makes a practice a yoga practice. On a deeper level, um, the fact that the way we breathe as humans, and we breathe in a very particular way, amongst the mammal air breathing animal kingdom, in that we have both voluntary and autonomic controls to our breathing. So there's things about our breathing that we can control and alter, lengthen, measure, and there's aspects of our breathing that we absolutely cannot control, like the mechanism that keeps us breathing while we're sleeping. And so navigating that reality of our breath actually puts us in touch with the definition, the very definition of what yoga practice is. If you look at the Yoga Sutras, you've got this idea of tapas on the one hand, which is basically working to change your system in a certain way from what it usually does into a different way of operating. And then you've got the Ishvara Pranidhana, which is the surrender, which is letting go of the things that are bigger or more powerful than you, or the things you can't control. And the Swadhyaya, which connects those principles in the definition of yoga practice, tapas, Swadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhana, that's the level of self-inquiry that's required to connect something you're doing to the breathing and to distinguish between the things you can and cannot control. It's the exact same principle as the serenity prayer, if you think about it.
That is a much deeper level. That's never heard it
That's
said.
breathing. The breathing is autonomic and voluntary. It teaches us that. It's something we can control and something that's out of our control, or that controls us, that we
Yeah.
surrender to.
So I know you've taught these workshops, the one you're coming into town for, which we're very excited about. So what makes every workshop where you're looking forward to teach it, or what do you enjoy about teaching them anymore? Since, I mean, how many years have you been doing it?
Oh, well, teaching since 1979.
Right. And it still obviously excites you. You still enjoy it because you are traveling
I
and
do. I do. Well, well, because I never know what's going to come out of my mouth.
really.
Yeah, because I'm working with a group of people that I've never worked with before.
Okay.
And you know, it's like, you know, if you think of it in musical terms, if you're like a jazz musician, you know, and you have basic structures to songs that you play and and all of that, you know that there's maybe a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there's a theme and ways to play variations of that theme. But every time you play it, it's going to be different, and the audience is going to be different, and you know the atmosphere is going to be different, and the questions will be different. You know, like if you're playing with other musicians ask and answer questions of each other all the time in
Okay.
their exchanges. And so I'm literally co-creating these experiences with the people in the room, and that's exciting to me because I always learn something new every time I teach.
So essentially, no two workshops of yours are ever quite the same. Like it's a
Not
big,
really. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I might repeat a joke or two, you know. Um,
yeah.
but
It's funny every time.
yeah. And there's quotes from Desikachar that I'm inspired to share.
Mhm.
And those don't change because, you know, he's not coming out with any new ones
Right.
because he's not with us anymore. So, you know, there's certain fixed points that all of the changeable stuff is sort of hanging on because there's principles, and the principles are true and eternal, and uh, they are what endure. I mean, the thing that comes out when I teach, and particularly when I teach about how I teach, is like with everything in yoga and in life, there has to be something that is stable, that creates the structure, and something that changes, you
Okay.
know, and that's the sthira sukha principle. And that's how asana practice is described, as having these dual qualities, but that's how a learning environment needs to exist as well, because you're teaching something.
Yeah.
There's a structure, like you're teaching a technique, you're teaching an asana or a movement or a breathing technique or whatever, you know, and there's a way to sort of get it right when you've learned how to do it. And there's ways of not getting it right. There's like a yes and a no, because
Right.
there's a structure to it. But what balances that and makes it sort of a living, individualized experience for people is the fact that there's inquiry as well, and there's no way to get an inquiry wrong, right? If I ask you to do something, and then I ask you to do something else, and then I ask you to notice what you notice is the difference between the this and the that. That's an inquiry, and I'm asking you to notice. And anything you can say in response to that question is the right answer. There's no way to have a wrong answer, even if your answer is, I'm sorry, I spaced out, I didn't hear you.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, you recognize that. Your mind wandered, right? So now you know that. Or I'm confused. I did the thing you asked to do, and I don't know what I'm feeling or whatever. It's like, okay, you're noticing that, right? So there's no wrong answer to an inquiry. There is a wrong answer to a technique. So balancing those two elements is the real sort of creative process that goes into creating a learning environment for people.
Okay. All right. So if someone was debating, hold on, let me do this. If someone was debating whether or not to sign up for your workshop, what would you tell them to convince them that it's worth their time?
Oh, that's easy. Money back guarantee.
Yeah. Is it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like
Okay.
it's no risk. It's
Got
no,
it.
I don't say that to everyone or at every workshop, but if this question comes up,
Yeah.
that's when I say it. And in all my years of teaching, we've only had once to give someone a refund. And it was just, they just, for whatever reason, didn't vibe with me or the atmosphere or the whatever. They just had some issues like, look, we will happily, if you did not have a useful experience, we'll happily give you your money back. So uh, it's a low risk proposition. Other than that, I would say the people who get attracted to my workshops usually are other yoga teachers. There's usually a high percentage of other yoga teachers, and so I'm not just teaching practice, I'm teaching about how I teach practice. And so to sort of get under the hood and see what makes a learning environment effective is something that other teachers find quite valuable. And if you're not a teacher and you're just a student, it's also valuable to sort of get under the hood of what makes a learning environment work, because you can think of times when you really did get something out of a class you were in, and you can go back and say, yeah, it's because, because this, and this box were really checked because they did a good job doing these things that I'm talking about, of balancing the technique and the inquiry. Because if you go too far off the rails in either direction, it's not a great experience for people. If there's not enough structure, people get anxious about that because they don't know what the hell's going on.
Right.
There's too much structure and not enough inquiry. It's like you're just being lectured at and yelled at and being told that if you just do the thing right, you'll get the result. And if you don't get the result, it's your fault. Right.
Okay.
So I think we've all been in
Yeah.
classes where there hasn't been a good balance between those elements.
And you remember the ones that have balance. You're right. That's why they stand out.
They do, because you get something out of it. You feel safe enough to have your own experience, and yet held enough by the structure of what's going on to know that you what you're doing and what you're accomplishing, and when you're not accomplishing something, which is just as important to know, because the whole point is to try things that you're not immediately good at and to see if you can get better and what's in the way. The techniques are there to show you what it is about your system that isn't as adaptable as it needs to be so that you can do the technique. That's why I tell people that yoga isn't about doing the asanas. It's about undoing what's in the way of the asanas.
Yeah. I remember that from your workshop. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, are there are there any specific prerequisites or recommended background knowledge that students need to have before they come?
Just a curiosity, really. If people have my book, Yoga Anatomy, just reading some of the front matter, the chapters before we do the asana analysis,
Yeah.
would be useful, particularly the chapter on breathing.
Okay.
There's a new chapter in the third edition called Anatomy as a Story, which I think is a very nice introduction to the whole topic about how we view anatomy as a lens for anything else we want to do in yoga. That's one of the new things Amy and I worked on for the third edition.
Yeah. I know you're excited about that one. I saw the
Yeah.
whole plot for it. Yeah. Okay. So you also have a strong, very strong background in body work field. How does that influence or enhance the way you teach?
Oh, well, you have a very different perspective on people's bodies when you spent over 20,000 hours elbow deep in them. Well, not quite elbow deep, but I do deep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and breathing, I focus a lot on people's breathing when we're doing the hands-on because of my um, interests and experience as a yoga educator. So it boils down to something my teacher was particularly focused on, and that is helping people have less dukkha, less suffering. Um, and if we go with what the word itself actually means, dukkha, it just means bad space. And
Okay.
sukha is good space. And so when you approach a body work, a hands-on practice from that perspective of trying to find where this person can experience more spaciousness in their body, in their movement, in their breathing in particular. That's a lens that helps me focus on which details are important to attend to. On a myofascial level, it could be as simple as finding out where things are a little bit stuck and where things can be sliding a little bit more and helping on that level. As far as the breathing goes, it would have to do with um, having more ability for all the structures that can change shape, which is what breathing is, to do that more efficiently with less um, uh, obstruction. So it deeply influences the body work, what I teach, and how I teach.
Okay. So for long-time yogis that have been practicing for a while, what advice would you give to them so they feel like they've hit a plateau or they're not seeing progress in their training or in their practice? How can they reinvent or re-energize their practice, either with your workshop or in other ways?
Well, certainly that is what the sort of thing people are looking for when they take a workshop with someone that like me, or someone that has a different perspective or a different um, lens. You know, so I think in general, how to stay inspired. I I think it really well, I would have to speak personally there because the the advantage I have that I am very fortunate to have had was the fact that I was able to work with someone like Desikachar for all those years that I studied with him. And that would have been from 1988 when I first met him to the last time I saw him in 2009. And he was very good at pointing out the principles behind things. The absolute sort of foundational realities onto which we can plant our feet and feel like there's something solid under us. And there are a number of things in yoga that offer that. Um, and ways in which we can connect with all of that through our bodies, which is why I spend a lot of time on people's feet, whether
Yeah.
it's on the table or in a workshop, because this is this idea of foundation, this idea of support, this idea of exchanging energy with the planet we live on by allowing your body's weight forces to travel down so the support that the earth is offering can come back up in response. Going back to simple things like that. Um, uh, there's a principle, one of those principles is that the simpler a practice is, the more deep a connection you can have to it, the more profound a connection you can have to it. So when I feel like I need inspiration, or I'm getting a little flat, or um, jaded even about any of this, I make sure I'm standing in my bare feet on a firm surface, and I just do the basics of reconnecting with those points in my feet
Okay.
where my body weight is traveling down, and I plug myself back into that reality.
Yeah.
And that can be a whole practice, just standing there and playing with sending that pathway of weight into those places that are connecting with the earth. And it turns out that for me, that's an extremely practical thing to be doing, because I have arthritic knees. I have osteoarthritis in my knees. I've had, sort of meniscus problems over the years, and all of that. And if it hadn't been for that ability to connect with my feet and what they're experiencing as they do their job of supporting me, and being able to engage my feet in a dialogue with my knees, so that when my knees are hurting, my feet understand that that's my knees asking for them to be doing something different.
Okay.
Um, that saved me from having my knees replaced.
Wow. Okay.
And I can still get out there and play basketball and walk around and do most things I need to do on knees, which if you look at the x-ray, you wonder how I'm doing any of that. It's because of this ability I have to return to that very basic thing of what it takes to be a better biped, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So the short answer to your question is go back to basics, strip it down, you
Yeah.
know, keep it simple.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your workshops tend to always sell out quickly. What do you attribute your popularity or their popularity for? And why do you think that people anticipate your classes still after all these years so much more now than before, maybe?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Post-pandemic, the sellouts are fewer and further between, frankly. Um,
Yeah.
the last the last truly sold out room I was in was in March of 2020 in Sydney, Australia, and that's where I got COVID.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, really. We
Get
were,
that.
you
Yeah.
know, everyone knew that it existed, at that point. But they just didn't know it existed down under. They thought they were safe, and we weren't wearing masks or distancing or anything like that. And so it would be nice to be in a room that crowded again
Yeah.
now that we're unmasked. But well, thank you for saying that. Um, I don't know. At this point, it's funny because there's so many generations of yoga teachers and students who've become teachers and their students and so on, that's happened over I've taught in 6 decades. I mean, I'm only about to be 66, which it doesn't mean I started teaching when I was 6 years old. It means I've taught in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the aughts, the teens, and the 20s. That's 6 decades, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of water under the bridge, and that's a lot of, I don't know, institutional memory, because
Mhm.
I've been at these sort of nexus points in not just the yoga world when it was transforming into what we now know today and what we are calling an industry, but also the fitness world and industry, which I have some connection with through sports medicine and all that, which preceded by about a decade
You're
yoga becoming so popular. So maybe people like to think that they're studying with an elder at this point, someone that's seen a few things and been present for a few things and maybe contributed in some way to uh, what this yoga world is now. I mean, I think a lot of people use the book. They
Yeah.
use anatomy in the teacher training courses, and so you see my name on the book and my picture in the book, and it's like, oh, he's coming to town. That would be, let's meet that guy.
Yeah.
And I think some people are surprised that I'm not just spouting anatomy
Right.
time, because I don't actually use a lot of anatomy when I'm teaching practice. I'm talking about yoga.
Mhm.
I mean, I started at an ashram before I met Desikachar. I was a swami. I was, doing the whole ashram Shivananda thing first. It was my original training. And so, it's not all just science and anatomy and all of that, which I guess some people expect. It really is, how does that lens let us look at sort of the eternal aspects of yoga and connect with them in a more embodied way?
Yeah. Do you think it might have something to do with what you mentioned before, that you've stuck to the basics so well, like the foundational aspects of everything yoga with all the, like you said, the fads, the new things, and you're still teaching.
Yeah, yeah. I never got into goat yoga or hot naked yoga or 420 yoga or any of that. In fact, at a certain point, it became almost a joke. Like when people would ask, well, what style of yoga do you teach? And they want a one-word answer that will convince them that they know something about what it is that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And for a while, there was this term Vini Yoga that people got familiar with that is connected with Desikachar, but then that got a little weird for a variety of reasons. And uh, I decided to just not use that term along with a lot of other people. And so, yeah, it's yoga, but if you want to describe it and not use a brand name, the best I can come up with is individualized breath-centered yoga. And that's, it's more syllables than, some of the brand names, but it describes the values that we have.
And individualized, meaning the practitioner for what they need.
Yes, adapting the yoga to the individual, not the other way
Right.
around. And even to the point where sometimes you don't want to focus on the breathing, because as important as the breath is, as we've been saying, for some people, too much focus on the breathing makes them anxious. So
Right.
for that individual, the best yoga may be to leave the breath aside, not focus on it, and just do something else.
Yeah.
Um, and that is what might serve them the best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think would be a unique experience? I know there you have a lot of courses. I've been in person with you and I've taken your online courses, but what do you think is unique to being with you? The principles are the same that you share, but being in person with you, what do you think the added value of that is?
Um, as opposed to seeing me on a little screen or
A computer recorded, yes.
yeah. People who have taken the courses or seen my videos or whatever, they're surprised how tall I am.
Yes.
6'2", and I'm not the tallest in my family. Two of my sons are bigger than me.
Okay.
Um, so you get to see the life-size version
Hmm.
of Leslie.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's just something about being in person in a room, not just with me, but with other people. There's
Yeah.
something there are moments in some of these workshops that are just very moving, like that, almost move people or do move people to tears, because every so often we'll pull someone aside who's having an issue with their breathing, and I'll show a few things and maybe even show a little bit of some of the hands-on stuff that I do just to illustrate some principles. And it's a very moving thing to be part of. And I haven't found a great way to communicate that level of some of the work I do online.
Yeah.
And so that's that sort of thing is available in person, and if you notice over the last 4 years, we've had to substitute the term in person for live, because
Live.
live can be in real time online
Yeah.
as
It-
opposed to asynchronous viewing of video content.
yeah.
Um, and so live doesn't quite work the way it used to, and so now we have to say in person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to agree with that. Yeah. I think mine I went to your training in Austin and you did the front line slow stacking of the spine and the spiral up and how the spine just
Oh,
sort of realigned. And it was absolutely mind blowing how the body you took it really slow from the feet up the
yeah, yeah,
shin. You did that. And I'd never felt my spine or my body recoil, or I don't know what you use the word, but it was a
yeah.
little bit electrical. Yeah. It was very intense to feel.
Yeah, there are moments like that. There are aha moments, like bodily aha moments that I know are available for people. And that's a major one for a lot of people, is getting the front of your spine to proprioceptively, interoceptively um, show up as what's holding up your body weight,
Right.
as opposed to the back. So you're describing a sort of a roll down, roll up thing that we do with the spine
Yeah. Yeah.
in some of the workshops. And in most of my workshops, actually, I make sure to make time for that, because I've seen people just radically transform it. Like it's like a light bulb going off. It's like, oh, that's where my support is in my spine.
Yeah.
And it's hard to forget once you've experienced it. And then to sort of explain, okay, what are the myofascial lines that are conducting this experience for us, and to look into some of the anatomy behind it is kind of fun too.
It was, I still remember it. I mean, it was like about my feet and standing up with the front of my body. It was transformative. It was great.
Yeah, and then you want to share that with other people. You want to, let other people light up like that too, which is great. And that's one of the things that's really nice for me, is just knowing how many more people exponentially I can um, help
Spread.
introduce into these experiences, because so many people who teach are parts of these workshops. Not just that, but people who teach teachers come to these workshops. So that's another order of magnitude of sharing this stuff.
Yeah, you're absolutely right with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so your workshops are intensive. This one specifically is going to be an intensive, but we hear that students say it flies by. What do you attribute that feeling of engagement, or how do you hold people's engagement for that long throughout the day?
Well, um, somebody once asked Albert Einstein to explain the theory of relativity,
Yeah,
you know, and he said, well, if you're sitting if you're sitting in the dentist chair, you know, a minute can seem like an hour. If you're
yeah.
sitting on a park bench next to a pretty girl, an hour can seem like a minute.
Okay.
Um, and the more engaged we can be with as much of ourselves as we can bring to this experience, the quicker the time will fly. And I always arrive at, like the end of a weekend workshop or something, and I go like, what? Wait, it feels like we
Um,
just got started.
yeah.
Um, and that's how you know that there's a real sort of engagement there. The time does seem to fly. And I would say, though, that within that there are moments that I think we've all experienced that keep us coming back, that feel timeless, in the sense that there's something that endures like through eternity that we can connect with. And I think breathing is a powerful model for that. One example is that as you and I are breathing right now, there are molecules, and there's like mathematical proofs for this, because of how tiny molecules are and how many of them there are, that we're breathing on a moment-to-moment basis. But every person that has ever lived on this planet that has breathed has had in their lungs at least one molecule that's moving in and out of you with each breath you take. Think of that.
So
And
the
it's,
interconnectedness, yeah.
yeah, the interconnectedness. And it's not just people, it's anything that's ever existed on this planet that had lungs.
Okay.
It, that's just, that's an extraordinary thing to think about. And it's real. It's like, that's the stuff that's coming in and out of us on a moment-to-moment basis.
Yeah. That'll hold your attention for sure. Okay, so where would you say students typically experience the biggest improvement after taking one of your workshops?
Well, that depends on the student. You know, my goal is for each person to have at least one aha moment. But on what level that's going to be, or in what aspect of their lives or their body or their practice it's going to show up, is really hard to predict. It could be related to some ache or pain that's been chronic with them that they didn't quite understand what it was about or how to work with it, and then all of a sudden they have a new perspective on that. So, you know, the reduction of a particular bit of dukkha that they're experiencing can be the takeaway. Um, I think lately, when I've been emphasizing this thing I mentioned about the sthira and sukha of a learning environment, for teachers, that's a very powerful model. I mean, that sort of, you know, shows the scaffolding of what's holding up a learning environment.
Yeah.
When you understand that, then you can sort of decorate it with whatever you want as long as that scaffold is there. And so for teachers, the fact that I'm not just teaching stuff, but teaching about how I'm teaching this stuff in terms of the methodology, sometimes that's a big uh, takeaway. And for other people, I think it's just also being given back some of the agency that
Mhm.
they can experience in a learning environment that often gets projected onto, or at the very least delegated to the person at the front of the room.
Right.
Um, because I don't want that responsibility, you know, to be the omniscient person that can look at you and tell you exactly what's wrong and what you need to do to fix it. That's a terrible kind of responsibility to think that you could have,
Yeah.
that you're taking on. You know, it took me years to get past that because the body worker thing in me, they wanted to fix people. You know, I'd be teaching a class and
Yeah.
I'd see people's doing things with their bodies and I'd go, oh, I don't know, and then we'd stop and work with them. And, you know, and it was fun and engaging and everyone learned something, but it wasn't a class anymore. It was a clinic. And,
Yeah.
and so for the longest time, I could only figure out how to lead clinics because I couldn't not look at people. And having seen them, I couldn't not respond to what I was seeing.
Right.
And so that's a perspective that I had to get beyond to really understand that if I'm doing my job right, it's not my job to be running around like a crazy person trying to fix everybody, you
Yeah.
know. Because let's face it, if there's someone in your class, no matter how good a teacher you are, how skilled a body worker you are, if there's someone in your class that's determined to hurt themselves, they're going to find a way to do it.
You're right. They will. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been that person, you know. I think everyone has at some point or other. And, you know, creating an environment where you can experience that about yourself, and then you're the one that ultimately is the only one that can do something about that. You know, it's not that, oh, the teacher took their eye off you for a minute and that's when you screwed up and hurt yourself, and it's the teacher's fault for not catching you.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we sort of touched on this one, but your anatomy workshops attract both yoga teachers and then dedicated students. How have you structured these workshops so that there's maximum value for both groups of people?
I treat the students like teachers, and I treat the teachers like students.
Okay.
And there's a big meeting place
Yeah.
there. Um, and yeah, we did touch on that because, you know, it's like when you lift up the hood and see how things work in terms of the body or learning environments, that's something that everyone can relate to, really, in whatever way is useful for them. I'll tell you this, the students have a lot easier time in the
Yeah.
workshops than the teachers, because the ahas that we mentioned, that I want everyone to have, there, an aha is when things come together in a new way, or a clearer way, or a way that explains more things than your previous insights or ideas were able to, right? But the things that are coming together to make the aha happen,
Yeah.
the shattered pieces of what you thought you knew.
Right.
And those are the uh-ohs. You can't have an aha without a few uh-ohs. And so it's the students, not the teachers, who have the fewest uh-ohs, or at least the smallest, the uh-ohs that are pretty much confined to the dimensions of their yoga mat, because
Yeah.
they're only there for themselves, for their practice, for their understanding. They're not invested in how they're teaching someone else to do their practice. They're just invested in their own practice. So, but a teacher, their uh-ohs extend beyond their mat to all those stuff that's coming out of their mouth, or ever has come out of their mouth, that
Right.
they're now reevaluating maybe. And then, of course, the teachers who teach teachers how to teach exponentially, again, have even bigger
Uh-oh.
uh-ohs.
Yeah.
And then you have to understand how big my uh-ohs are, because I wrote the friggin' book that the people who teach the teachers how to teach use when they're teaching.
Right.
And so, like when Amy and I are getting together a few years ago, and we're reading this version of our book, which
Yeah.
came out in 2011.
That one. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're getting ready to revise it after 10 years of experience and teaching and, evolution on both our parts. And we're looking at the words that we committed to print 10 years ago, of which there are now 1 million copies.
Yeah.
And we're going, "Oh,
Oh no.
that's exponentially, again, how many orders of magnitude is that beyond just someone who's showing up just to, improve their practice of their breathing a little bit, you
Yeah.
know? And so, yeah, so to get this to get this to turn into this, there was a lot of that going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
You kept the same cover. Was that on purpose?
Different color.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah. The cover has become iconic, and Lydia, my partner Lydia, designed it.
Did she?
Yes, and well, we had to, because the cover that our publishers wanted to use was not, well, let's just say, wasn't up to my standards, and that became the template for all their other anatomy titles. If you look at all the anatomy titles for human kinetics,
Yes.
swimming anatomy, running anatomy, fencing anatomy, whatever, they have all these, you know, different activities with books like ours that show the muscles and all that. The covers are all derived from our cover that Lydia designed.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was all the questions. I have one more if you don't mind, just for my personal. How did you go from just being a student to then yoga educator, and then sort of your whole, how did that shift for you, since you were just in India just to kind of practice, and then it totally changed?
Well, almost right away, like I did my first teacher's training in 1979 with Shivananda, up at the headquarters in Canada, in Quebec,
Okay.
north of Montreal. And that very summer of 79, I stayed on after my training was over, because there was this big festival that they were putting on called the Festival of Inner Light. And I had some experience at that point in my life in theater production and all of that. And they needed to build a stage. And so I volunteered to stay and help them build a stage. And I just casually asked, okay, so, once we get this thing built, who's going to be the stage manager? And they were
Yeah.
like, what's a stage manager? And I was like,
Uh-oh.
yeah, these people kind of need me. And so it's sort of like that at ashrams, if you can get stuff done or do things, they give you things to do. So almost right away, I was moving towards areas of responsibility with production and teaching and all of that. And so it just evolved from there, that I got more and more involved with that organization. I eventually ended up in India, became a Swami, became a director of one of their centers in Los Angeles. And, it just turned into the only job I've ever had, really. The only career I've ever had. I had other jobs when I was younger, but it's the only career I've ever had. And at this point, if this yoga thing doesn't work out, I'm kind of screwed.
Oh, yeah.
At the age of 66, like, having to find my second act. I don't know.
I don't know. I think you're doing pretty well still.
Well, I see the body work as part of it. I mean, you could say that was a separate career, but I don't see them as being very different at all, because it's just it's working with people and their breath and their bodies, and just creating situations where that can occur, whether it's a private practice or a studio or a festival or a conference or a symposium, and I've helped organize all of those, but it was always about helping to create or produce or sustain these spaces in which people can find more of their spaces.
Yeah. I think very few people that I've taken have your lens of it, of creating that equal self-inquiry and structure. Like they're primarily to teach you, you're there to make sure I learn something. You know what I mean? Like the difference of me figuring it out as opposed to you teaching it to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
But that's why the biological model of sthira sukha, that grounds the sthira sukha perspective, is so important, because it's the cell. It's what the cell membrane does. It's semi-permeable. It has structure, it has stability, but it has space, and things move in and out of it. And so to know that this is the absolute principle upon which all things that live operate,
Yeah.
and that you've got the prana and the apana happening, and the sthira and the sukha that lets it happen. It's not a theory. It's just
Right.
when you have that lens available and pointed at anything you want to understand in life, you can see what makes things work when they're working and when they're out of whack.
Yeah.
Too much sukha, not enough sthira, vice versa. It's probably one of the most powerful perspectives that we can use to bring clarity to situations in our lives, or our relationships, or any of our endeavors.
Right. You definitely make it tangible, where like the principles are sort of broad or hard to understand, and you make it tangible where it applies to life. Like you bring life to the principle with the way you teach.
Well, that's my goal, but thank you for noticing.
Definitely. Well, I really appreciate your time.